Hello, and thank you for tuning in this afternoon. Um, this is Roots of Life Christian Counsel Ministries, LLC, where we seek to provide holistic healing for the broken in spirit, mind, and body through biblical counsel. The scripture foundation for this ministry is the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 5, which states, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abides in me, and I in you, shall bear much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. Those are the words of Jesus Christ explaining the relationship with us and Him. He refers himself as the vine. We are the branches. As long as we are connected to Jesus Christ, the vine of Christ, from which our source of healing flows, we shall bear much fruit, which replicates the goodness, the love of God. And it's also when we are connected or remain connected in Him, it is our source of healing for our states of brokenness when we remain in Him. My name is Minister Zanetta Baker. I am a certified pastoral counselor, a licensed minister, as well as a registered nurse. The discussion we will have today is the continuation of the discussion we started last week, Wednesday, on the roots of personal boundary problems. Today will be part two. As a recap from last week, part one, we discussed what are boundaries. Um, Some people I've spoken to have never heard of it, or they had a different idea or perception of what a boundary is. So, boundaries, personal boundaries, what they do is they help us guard our heart from people who seek to do no good towards us. Boundaries. They help guard our heart and soul and to maintain it. That is also, the Bible supports that in the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23. It states, above all else, guard your heart and soul, because everything that we do flows from it. Meaning that the decisions that we make in reference to engaging in relationships with other folk flows from our heart, the condition of our heart. So if the condition of our heart is broken, is bitter, is hostile, imagine the quality of the relationship we have with others, which with a damaged heart because of lack of setting appropriate boundaries to protect us. Having having boundaries leads us to a sense of personal ownership, like that of physical boundaries with owning material property, like that of a house. We have property lines and boundaries that are set against those um, who violate those boundaries. If they violate the boundaries of your property lines, there's consequences that follow. In like manner, we have spiritual, personal boundaries we are to set for ourselves that are designed to protect us, to protect our heart, to protect our emotional states, our psychological states, and our mental states. It separates ownership from others, and it defines who does what and who does not, what we allow and what we will not is personal responsibility. Boundaries come from the very nature of God. How? Well, God defines and takes responsibility for his character and personality by telling us what he plans, what he will and will not allow, his dislikes and likes. Types of boundaries are um, things like words. The basic word in the English dictionary, N-O, spells no. That is the first and basic boundary that we can set towards others. Saying no sets limits on being abused by others and their sinful treatment towards us. A second type of boundary is emotional distancing. Emotional distancing means it is a temporary boundary to give your heart, if you've been heartbroken, this boundary allows a space to give your heart the space it needs to feel safe. If you've been heartbroken by some undeserving action thrusted against you by someone whom you loved or thought loved you in return. So it is okay temporarily to emotionally distance yourself if you, especially if it's a recent heartbreak or breakup. You want to emotionally distance yourself is to protect you. Is to protect your heart. Guard your heart, as the word says. Above all else, guard our hearts because everything that we do and say flows directly from it. So, giving yourself that emotional time to heal is absolutely necessary. A third type of boundary is setting consequences. Consequences, we all tend to struggle in this area. Why? Because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We don't want to seem like we're too strict or any of those things. Basically, we don't want to appear to be the bad guy when we have to set consequences against others. However, it's necessary if it threatens your emotional safety and security, your psychological well-being and mental stability is absolutely necessary to set consequences against those who basically do not have your best interests at heart. Setting consequences means going back to God's nature. If the Bible sets consequences for certain behaviors that opposes his standards, why do we struggle in this area? And second, and as an example, in Second Thessalonians, let me get that for you. Second Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10 states, if anyone will not work, don't let him or her eat. That's the consequence. Setting a consequence. If you're not going to work and earn, then you're not going to eat. You don't deserve to have the privileges that come along with it. So the same applies with our emotional states. If someone seeks to desire to hurt us, why should we allow them in that personal space if it's going to do me harm or not going to benefit not just self, but both the relationship? Setting the consequences, setting the boundaries. A fourth type of boundary is setting limits. Limits on others. This means limiting being exposed to people who are behaving poorly. Basically, we know we cannot change no other human being outside of ourselves. We are only responsible for us. We cannot change, charge, or be in position to change someone else. That is not our role. That is not our job. And we can't make no one do anything. We can't make someone behave appropriately. We then limit ourselves personally from being in the company of toxicity. Set limits. It's the same with setting the consequence. So I'm setting the limit. You can go but so far. And then I'm going to attach a consequence along with it. A fifth type of boundary is a God model. A God model. Because boundaries stem from the very nature of who God is, standards and all. We can emulate God's model. It means to set the standard. Let people, what does that mean? It means letting people be who they are. Let them be who they are. And then separate yourself from them if the behavior goes against your standard. This protects not only our emotional safety and security, but it protects our psychological well being and protects our heart from those things or persons who seek to destroy our experience, our ability to experience love and acceptance. Boundaries sounds simple, yet can be difficult if someone was not taught how to set the boundaries, if someone has not witnessed positive boundary setting, how can one emulate or replicate with someone else boundary settings? And this is where we come into problems with dysfunctional relationships. The core of it, there are poor boundaries with both persons. It's not, most of the time, it's not just one, it's both when there is a dysfunctional type of relationship that's going on. And when I mean dysfunctional, I am referring to relationships that may be abusive, relationships where there is an element of control, um, dominance, all of those type of manipulation, all of those mechanisms or types of relationships have a core issue of boundaries. Poor boundaries are set. So, what are some type of boundary problems? And how does a personal boundary problem morph into dysfunctional relationships? That will be the topic, part two today, is highlighting some type of boundary problems, what they look like in relationships, and how they can cause a relationship to become dysfunctional. So, one type of boundary problem is called a compliant. Compliant. When you think of the word compliant, you expect someone to obey. Obey, do as they're told, be compliant to the rules or to the expectations set forth by whoever the person that is giving the order or the charge. But in this aspect, compliant um, as a boundary problem, a person who is compliant is a person who has difficulty in saying no, a difficulty in saying no and oftentimes will say yes to bad things. Often say yes to bad things because their ability to say no has been either damaged, undeveloped, or not taught. Um, this goes all the way back. Compliance are come about as a result of childhood. I said it before in my previous videos that our early childhood relationships, the conditions in which we were raised, and the quality of the parental relationships poses great influence on how we are shaped into adults and how we interact into relationships with other people in any form of relationship, personal, professional, social relationships, has a lot to do with what we've seen, what we've witnessed, what has been practiced, modeled before us. We adapted onto ourselves, good and bad, dysfunctional and functional. So compliance blocks a child's ability to say no. Compliance are reared, developed from childhood. Somewhere along the line, a child's ability to say no has been hampered, it has been hindered, it has been blocked, which unfortunately handicaps a child for life. Now, this child has become an adult. They do not know how to say no to the things that are bad. So they are unable to recognize when to say no when a situation is threatening to their emotional, psychic, and mental well being. Compliance are pervasive and they are unable to distinguish themselves from other person's needs. They are unable to stand on their own. How and why? When a child is unable to practice or say no, now they are an adult, still do not have not been taught how to say no to things that are threatening to self. It paralyzes. It paralyzes a person. It paralyzes the no muscles for various reasons, out of fear, is driven by fear out of hurting someone else's feelings, out of fear of being abandoned or separated, um, become out of fear of being totally dependent on somebody else, uh, out of fear of being subjected to someone else's anger and then their subsequent punishment. As a result, if I say no, then this is what's going to happen to me. So it's fear driven. Um, being afraid to say no out of shame, being ashamed, or being judged to be unspiritual. Saying no might stir up fear, as if I say no, I'm going to be seen as bad or selfish. Um, and another possible could be guilt driven. If I say no, I'm going to feel guilty in saying no to this or that or this person. And what is guilt? Guilt is one's over strict, critical conscience. It is a self defeating mechanism that we put on ourselves out of, again, fear driven, because we are afraid of what the result of what someone else might say or do. Compliant. A compliant, that is a boundary problem. Imagine how that looks like how that looks like in a dysfunctional relationship, an abusive relationship, be it a man or a female. Boundary problems are not gender specific. Anybody can have a boundary problem, man and female. So, an abusive type of relationship, one is a compliant and one is controlling. The compliant will feel submissive to the controller because, again, they are unable to say no. They are unable to recognize danger, unable to recognize things that are threatening to themselves emotionally. They are vulnerable, left subject to the control, to the selfish control, most of the time, of someone else's needs. That is a boundary problem. That is how dysfunctional relationships begin to morph. When you have that type of boundary, a compliant type of individual who falls subject to a controller, and a controller recognizes a compliant because, again, they don't know, they do not how to say no to bad things. They do not know how to say no to bad things. A second type of boundary problem is the controller. The controller. The controller is an individual who does not respect other people's boundaries. They do not respect. So imagine a compliant person who does not know how to say no, and a controller who already does not respect no one else's boundaries, and they engage into a relationship. Imagine the quality of that relationship. What does that look like? It looks very abusive because the compliant doesn't feel like they have a voice. They are operating out of fear. The controller takes advantage of that and ends up controlling the compliant, vulnerable person. That's dysfunctional. That is absolutely dysfunctional. And we see a lot of that, unfortunately, in abusive type of relationships, be it a physical abusive relationship, emotional abusive relationship, a verbally abusive relationship. Um, we see in a psychological abusive relationship. Somewhere along the line, someone is a controller, someone is a compliant because they are unable to stand on their own. They have a boundary, and it stems from somewhere along their childhood. There has been neglect somewhere along the lines. That individual is in a state of brokenness. They may not realize it at the time, and being engaged in dysfunctional relationships may stir that up, and it may surface that there's an unresolved brokenness individually within that needs to be healed before one can recognize that they're in a dysfunctional relationship. With controllers, there are different types of controllers. You have your aggressive controllers. These people clearly do not listen to the boundaries of other people. So, we listed some types of boundaries we can set is setting consequences and setting the limits. Okay. Well, aggressive controllers who do not respect other people's boundaries, they will completely dismiss it, um, and they will run over your fence like it's invisible. They are sometimes verbally abusive and sometimes physically abusive, and they are simply are not aware that others have boundaries. These people in themselves do not have um, established boundaries within themselves. Whom you do not respect says a lot about yourself. If you don't respect others, how much do you respect yourself? I stated before that the relationship, the quality of the relationship that we have with ourselves will extend itself to how we relate with other people. If we have poor relationship with ourselves, we will most likely have a poor relationship or establish poor relationships with other people. And it gives an ear, not an ear, an eye, a vision into the quality of the relationship one has with God. The vertical relationship. If the quality of the relationship with God is non-existent, is weak, it's going to affect how we relate, how we see ourselves, and how we relate with other people. Poor boundaries, poor boundaries. It honestly starts with us. And this may sound like it's common sense, but if it was so common sense, we would not see so many dysfunctional, abusive relationships. We would not see so many broken marriages. We would not see none of this if each one of us take a personal accountability for oneself. Check yourself. Establish boundaries with self that will not only protect you, but protect those who you engage in relationship with. Another type of controller is a manipulative controller. A manipulative controller, they try to persuade people out of their boundaries. Now, that's selfish driven. It's selfish. Manipulative. They use guilt written type of messages. You sure? You really gonna do that? What benefit is that? Guilt. That instills guilt in us. Okay, well, is that bad? Is that selfish of me? We begin to question ourselves. Don't we have a lot of that as well? Manipulative. Manipulation, root it's selfish. That selfish driven motivation that the individual is trying to gain from whom they're trying to manipulate. That's selfish. And in turn, someone will get hurt as a result. Um, boundaries. A third one is a non responsive. A non responsive type of boundary problem. A non responsive individual is a person who does not hear the needs of others. They do not hear the needs of others. Remember that boundaries are a way to describe our spheres of responsibility, what we are and what we are not. We set the limits towards others, we set the standards towards others. A non responsive is an individual perhaps who has received or who has been a subject of not being heard or responded to in their time of need. So now this person grows up to emulate exactly what's been done to them because they know no other way. If they have not been witnessed how to respond appropriately to the needs of others, they will not be so callous to not hear the needs of someone else. That is a boundary problem. There is so much to discuss with the boundaries, how we set the boundaries or the lack thereof when we are in relationships, in any type of relationships with other people. Um, this can go on and on and on. Um, I've listed about three types of boundary, personal boundary problems: the compliant, the non-responsive, and the controller, and with the different types of controllers and what they look like when you engage into relationships. Can you not see the dysfunctionality that can grow when you have these type of these are broken individuals here that do not have proper boundaries set with themselves, let alone able to set with other people. I will have to continue part three with personal boundary lines, or problems, and how they morph themselves into relationships, because this is prevalent in today's time. Again, with the dysfunctionality amongst one another in relationship, it is unbelievable. And it's all due to a lack of knowing yourself, understanding where I begin, where you end, what I will allow and will not allow. Sometimes we are not taught these things, for lack of knowledge. And this is my passion to do this very thing. I wasn't taught the boundaries. It was learned through trial and error in my own personal relationships. Um, and now becoming a counselor and becoming aware of boundaries, and how we interrelate, not only with ourselves, but how that affects how we relate with other folk. It is absolutely profound. And I'm passionate to share this information so you all can establish healthy, positive, positive relationships with yourself first and with other people whom you are in relationship with. I thank you so much for tuning in to the Roots of Life Christian Council Ministries for this topic today on personal boundary problems, part two. We will continue a part three, um, because there is so much more that I like to share in reference to, and going a little more into detail, in different type of relationships with different type of individuals with different type of boundary problems, so we can paint a clear picture of what does it look like. Why? Because perhaps you may know somebody, you may see someone who is in a dysfunctional relationship, and you may not be able to pinpoint or to point the finger on exactly what, but being able to have the knowledge of what it looks like. What are some of the signs and symptoms, rather, of different types of um, personal boundary problems? You can help somebody, if not for yourself. So I pray that you would tune in again. And if not able to tune in, the video will be posted for later viewing and also available on my website, which is available at any time at www.rootsoflifeccm.com. I pray that you were blessed. I pray that you're able to take away something from the discussion today. Again, if not for yourself, then for someone that you know who may benefit from the information. God bless you. Thank you again for tuning in. And until next time, be blessed.